Hey guys, subscribe for daily content. And if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks! What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I'm going to be talking about different types of knives that I think you probably shouldn't be handing off to people who are, brand new to the knife world or very, very unfamiliar with different types of knives in general. I've done this video before. And while I stand by what I said in it, I don't think I did the best job delivering the information and explaining myself. So I thought I'd do an updated video to share with you guys because I think it might be beneficial for a lot of people, whether you're new or not. Also, the original topic credit absolutely goes to Lugermonger. I should have made that clear in the first video that I did, however, I think it was a couple years ago. Yeah, he came up with the original topic like 6 or 7 years ago, and I watched that video and I thought that's a great topic. That can be really helpful for people, and I'd like to expand on that. So the original video was done by Lugermonger, and you guys should absolutely check that out. Thanks so much to my generous patrons who are supporting me right now. There's a link for Patreon right down below. And please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. So, if you're familiar with the knife world, you know that knives are, there are inexpensive simple knives, there are expensive simple knives, there are inexpensive complicated knives, and there are expensive complicated knives. And then there are massive amounts of subcategories that go beyond that. In fact, I'm not really going to be able to talk about every single locking mechanism or operational mechanism that exists in the knife world. I have a few that I've found in my experience. Even when you explain these things to people, that was one of the complaints with my video. They said this whole video could be wrapped up if you just explain how the thing works before you hand it off. Right, that's a good idea. You should absolutely explain these types of things, especially objects like knives that have blades. You should explain how the locking system works, right? How the deployment system works before you hand it off. But here's the problem, and everybody who's ever handed off a more complicated knife to somebody, even after explaining it, they know what I'm about to say. Human beings do not follow instructions perfectly. It's naturally, they just don't do it the first time. You can tell people exactly how something works and they'll go, okay, and not do it. Like sometimes partially or sometimes entirely. I've had people completely ignore my instructions before. Here's the problem. In the setting where this is most likely to happen, right? It's a work setting. You've got a buddy who's doing something, helping you do something, right? You guys are both trying to complete a task. Maybe he doesn't have a knife. He didn't even bring his utility knife, his little box cutter, right? Hey, buddy, you got a knife? No problem. Here, actually, what you want to do is move the frame like, and you go, okay, I got it. I just need to make a quick cut. And you go, oh, actually, you need to open the thing first, and right? And then he takes it and he makes a cut, and then he goes to mess with it and to close it or whatever, and something happens because this was a setting where he needed a tool of convenience quickly, and due to the complicated nature of said object, we ended up with a problem. So yeah, while I agree explaining it thoroughly is a good idea, it doesn't always work because of the environment that you're in. So you can avoid this situation if you're somebody who's a knife person by handing off something else, which we're going to talk about at the end of the video. I'm going to give you guys some suggestions of other smaller knives that you can carry, backup knives that I think are better. Moving on here, we've got a few different categories of knives. We're going to talk about all of them, and I've got lots of examples for each except for the first category here. Let's talk about ballast songs. Look, there are people who are really, really familiar with these things. There are people who can do incredible tricks and things. And there's even people who will swear by the convenience of a ballast song, right? Pulling it out of your pocket and getting it out, right? Because I always talk about this, the least amount of motions from your pocket to your hand so you can make that cut and then get it. It doesn't need to be this big flashy thing, right? And we're also, we're talking about tools in an environment that calls for a tool. I found a lot of knives. If you are new to my channel, I've uploaded nearly 2,000 videos. I've found ballast songs to be interesting, and I'm infinitely impressed by the people who can manipulate them, in really flashy ways. But they are, in my opinion, nowhere near as convenient as most other designs that are out there. These are, they're neat, but unless you know exactly what you're doing, I don't recommend that people really mess around with these unless the environment is, as I said before, extremely controlled. And when I say that, I mean like two people sitting around, safe environment, you've got a nice wide open table, and you've got as much time as you need to explain how the object works, right? That's much more controlled. This, handing it off, if you can imagine, you got two guys up on a ladder. Hey, can I borrow your knife real quick? And you're like, here you go. No. No, absolutely not. This is not safe. You're going to get people, you're about 50% likely to drop it, or that person, 50% likely to drop it, 50% likely to accidentally cause themselves injury, which is obviously what we don't want, right? Just bad news. So that part of you that you're like, I'll look pretty cool handing in my Ballast knife, right? The payout's pretty low compared to the potential for disaster with something like this. No. In fact, I'm going to tell you guys right now, I don't think a Ballast is a recommendable object to carry day to day anyway, right? I know some of you are concerned with different elements of your life. Like, what if I need it for this? What if I need to, I'm going to, in a dark alley somewhere. I still think there are better objects. They're interesting in what people can do with them. It's impressive, but this isn't an object that I think is convenient for somebody who's familiar with the knife world. And I think it's a terrible idea to hand off to somebody who's new to knives. Absolutely. So that's category number one there. Moving on here, and this is, all of these are going to get a little bit of, a side opening automatic knife. We've got the, I don't know what the Ballast was called, by the way. It's a cheapie. This is the Protec SG. It's a collaboration between Strider and Protec. These are made in the USA. This particular variant is quite a bit, it's older, titanium, right? That's not the point. It's just people always ask, so I wanted to tell them. You can still get versions of this knife nowadays. Side opening automatic knives, it's pretty straightforward. To people who are familiar with the knife world, it's not an assisted knife, right? It's under tension. You push the button and the blade comes flying out. If you're familiar with stuff like this, then it's no problem. Your muscle memory knows exactly how much power that specific blade has behind it, right? I have shown this particular knife in a controlled setting to so many people. So many people where I've said, listen, here's what's going to happen. That button, you're going to push it, and that blade is going to come out. It's like a switchblade, right? Oftentimes, this is what I hear. Oh, I know, my uncle, Uncle Billy Bob, Uncle Randy has one of these. He showed it to me a few years back. I know what I'm doing, right? Yeah. Well, here's what happens. They hold on to it, right, with what they assume is the right amount of grip. They push the button. Best case scenario, it goes, and it kind of does this, and they go, whoa! Or, worst case scenario, it flies out of their hands, right? Newer people, right, and I'm not trying to sound pompous or arrogant, but people don't really know exactly how much gripitude, to quote Nick Shabazz, to apply to something like this because they don't know how powerful it's going to be. Side opening automatic knives, Benchmade Adamas, I'm looking at you. Some of them are really, really powerful, and it's shocking the amount of force that comes out of there. To somebody who's unfamiliar, yeah, again, while I do believe that these are tools of incredible convenience, much more appropriate, right? A side opening automatic knife, they still have the potential for disaster. And it's cringy to say this, but the truth is that assisted knives are kind of the same deal, right? We've got the Kershaw Blur here, absolutely a knife that you can still get. People just don't know they understand, you can tell them, hey, it's going to come flying out of there when you do that. But it doesn't always work, right? When you explain, like, hey, when you push that, they kind of do this, right? And it goes flying all over the place. If you're sitting down, if you're in a controlled environment, then sure, explain it to them. But, in a work setting where you're going to pass something off, right, unless they are specifically familiar with this type of stuff, then no, I would not recommend an automatic knife. A lot of this seems obvious, right? But I can guarantee, probably half the people watching this video right now have been in this exact scenario before, and they've learned from it, from people just not being able to follow instructions or not being as familiar as they had originally assumed. Moving on here, this is a little bit of a different one. We're going to talk about frame locks. Frame locks, that's like the simplest type of, right? So for those of you who don't know, a frame lock is a lock. This is, by the way, Hinder Eclipse. We have the Chavez 229, and we have the Strider, and we're actually built by Medford 3/4 AR. The frame lock knives are ones where the frame itself is actually what's locking the knife. They originally was called the Reeve Integral Lock, meaning the lock was actually part of the frame, right? It is exposed, which is different than a liner lock, which I'm going to give you guys an example of right here. The liner lock is underneath the scale and not exposed from this side. For whatever reason, this is such a simple concept, right? If you look at this, The lock is attached here, and it's moving over to contact the tang, right? The little chip there is a steel lock bar insert to prevent, excessive wear over time. So by moving the lock out of the way, the blade can then close. I have never more thoroughly explained how something works. My dad is a perfect example of this. I have explained, and I love my dad, and I've given him, tons of different knives. I have explained frame locks to my dad so many times. Dad, you're going to deploy it. You're going to turn it this way, and as you can see, the bar has slid into position underneath the tang. To disengage this lock, you will move this bar out of the way of the tang so that the blade can close. No matter how many times I explain it, this is what he does. You guys ready? You guys know exactly what's coming. This is what people do. They look at it, and then they take two thumbs right here, and they aggressively push the lock bar into the tang. Why? I get it. They're unfamiliar with it, right? And like, for whatever reason, when it comes to a frame lock, and not people are going to tell me, like, whenever I hand frame locks off to people, they instinctively know how, some people do. But I found more often than not, people just don't get it. It doesn't quite sync up. For whatever reason, people, their brain tells them, okay, the way to disengage it is to push it further in. I don't know why. I've never had that issue. From the moment that I first saw a frame lock, I was like, okay, obviously you move that up, right? But for whatever reason, people don't see them that way. And the problem with this is, number one, it's not supposed to do that, right? There's a potential that they could slip, right? When you're pushing a mechanism sort of into itself in a direction it's not supposed to go, there's a chance that, you could slip or the blade's out, right? So the frame lock is not supposed to move that way. It's supposed to move the other way. So there's potential for disaster there. On top of that, if they push extremely hard, it's going to create additional wear between the usually titanium, there's steel frame locks, right? It's going to create unnecessary wear between the lock face and the tang of the blade, which isn't something that you want. In an extreme situation where somebody's really being stupid and pushing super hard on it, you can actually warp that. And what happens is that you end up with lock rock or vertical play. Click, 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 click. That's not good. If you mess with that geometry too much, and that's the case, I know people want to say that's why I don't carry a frame lock because they're inferior. No, any knife, you put enough pressure in the wrong direction, you can cause, warpage to the mechanism, and then the blade doesn't operate or lock out correctly, and it could potentially lead to the lock slipping and failing when you're trying to use the knife like you normally would, right? So that's a problem. I don't recommend handing off frame locks to people. I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10, that's what people do. And again, I'm not trying to sound pompous or arrogant, but my goodness, it happens all the time. I just don't, and I've been in a situation where I've literally only been carrying one knife and it was a frame lock, and they're like, can I see that? And I go, nah, no, I'm not going to hand this one off because it's got a weird thing to it, And you sound like a jerk, but it's like, do I want to hand this off to somebody who I think might accidentally damage the knife or themselves? No, I don't want to do it. So, frame locks, it sounds silly, but I'm telling you, look down in my comments section. You're going to have lots of people going, yep, that's exactly what happens. That's what people do. Moving on here, here's another obvious one. OTFs. We have the Microtech Combat Troodon, in this case Hellhound, and we have the Microtech Scarab 2. These are larger ones, right? There's lots of different OTFs out there. These are American OTFs. They're expensive. There are inexpensive OTFs. It applies all the way around. These are double action, by the way. We're going to talk about single action. An OTF, automatic, out the front automatic knife. Generally speaking, it has a little switch back here. You push it forward, the blade deploys, hold it back, the blade sucks back in, right? That's how that works, right? New people always wonder, can you hold that up to something and just fire it directly through? No, the spring is not powerful enough to do that. In fact, I'll show you here by just firing my Combat Troodon into my wallet. The blade comes off it's basically free swinging or free sliding, right? And then to reset it, you pull it out all the way, it clicks, and you're good to go again, right? That's how that works. Now, the problem is that new people love to test this. People just really want to test it. They, in some situations, it sucks. I have been in this situation before with both expensive and inexpensive OTFs. I don't want my knives tested, right? People who are unfamiliar with knives or unfamiliar with the enthusiast knife world, they could care less how expensive it is, and actually most of the time they'll get, offended by the price. Most people treat knives like pry bars, like screwdrivers, like hammers. They could care less. Edge retention and edge stability and the cleanness of the blade and all that, whether or not it's got chips in it, that doesn't make any difference to people. An OTF, people immediately want to test, right? So as soon as you can say, okay, so here's how it operates. You slide it forward and it deploys. You slide it backwards and it goes back in, right? What you expect them to do is turn around and use it like a knife and then hand it back to you. But this is what people do with OTFs. They do this a couple of times and then they go, neat. And then they point it directly. I had a guy point it directly at a shingle. We were up on a roof. First thing he does, turns it and without saying anything and tries to fire it direct. And I'm like, no. And he's like, why? It's just a knife, right? And then, so then they're confused. Why didn't it go through? I saw this movie where it pierces everything. Well, number one, that's movie nonsense. Number two, you just messed up the tip of my knife, right? And if you're carrying an expensive one, you're like, then you have to be the guy who's like, you messed up the tip of my really expensive knife, and it's important to me that the edge stays right. You know what? It sucks. That's a series of events that you don't want to do. Worst case scenario, once people figure out, oh, it's not powerful enough to go through a solid, in that case, a shingle. I've never had this happen, but worst case scenario, somebody thinks that they're tough enough to test it, right? Like, well, you don't want that. You don't want people trying to be tough and like, oh, well, if it'll stop, right? Absolutely, it can cause injury. The irony here is that I think OTFs, for people who are familiar with them and who are actually going to use them like tools and not treat them like a toy, which unfortunately is what people do, right? I think that OTFs are actually safer than a lot of knives because of how simple the operational mechanism is. In and out, that's it. The amount of force that would need to be applied to deploy this thing is enough that I would say it's virtually impossible that the thing is going to go off in your pocket. These are extremely utilitarian, right? It's just, you really need some sit-down time to explain, here's what you do and do not do with an OTF, right? So again, the scenario where you are up on a ladder and your buddy's like, I need a knife real quick, just give me a knife, right? Sure. But not an OTF. Don't, because people do stupid things. No matter how, no matter how thorough you are with instructions, people do stupid things with OTFs because the little kid in them that's in all of us and was in all of us the first time we handled an OTF, the little kid in them will do something dumb with that knife, right? And the more expensive that knife is, the worse it's going to be. I think this goes without saying. I'm going to show a video here while I'm talking. Single action OTFs are a much worse idea. A single action OTF is one where the blade is primed already. You push a button and the blade comes blasting out of the front. Now, while these still for the most part will not puncture everything, they are much, much more powerful than a double action OTF. I've actually once, I have accidentally injured myself with one of these and it is not good. These are extremely powerful. And it takes much less pressure to deploy this thing. It's much more likely it will deploy accidentally. I would highly advise not handing off a single action OTF to somebody who's even people who are kind of familiar. I think that this is one of the worst ideas. Fortunately, we don't see a lot of these. We see Heretic Knives make some. We've got Piranha, I think. Your Microtech makes the Halo 6. And then like Protec makes the Dark Angel, and there's some other ones, right? But even your inexpensive weird, these, are just more, like people who are super duper familiar with them, this is kind of one that you keep absolutely to yourself. And if you know how it operates, then great, right? But this is probably, one of the biggest don't hand this off to people types of knives for all the same reasons of the double action OTFs, but also because I really think that these are a lot more dangerous. I think it's much more likely that this type of thing is going to cause accidental injury. So probably avoid these altogether. And that video was mine. That was my review, whichever knife that I showed there. And then moving on here, the last one, and this is kind of an obvious one, but the temptation is there. If you are, and this isn't going to be something that makes sense to everybody, but expensive knives. Very, very expensive knives. We're looking at the Rockstead Higo 2 and the Shirogorov Quantum. These are two of the more expensive knives in my collection. It's fun to, I've been carrying this Rockstead and using it, and I love using it. I don't carry the Shirogorov, I just have it and I enjoy it, right? But if you end up climbing the ladder of the knife world and carrying really expensive knives, the temptation to share this hobby with other people is always going to be there, right? I don't think that it's pompous or arrogance or show-offy to want to share this type of stuff with other people. I mean, if you're just like throwing it in the face and look how much I spent on this, well then yeah, then you're a jerk, right? But wanting to share this type of stuff with other people is natural. We naturally want to do this. In fact, if nobody did that, the knife community would consist of basically nobody. It's because we want to share this stuff. It's interesting, right? But unless you have, once again, a very controlled environment, it's not a good idea to hand off a super expensive knife to somebody because it's really, you probably don't want it damaged, right? Now, the Rockstead is a simple liner lock. I've found for whatever reason, like I said earlier, the liner locks, people just seem to, in my experience, they seem to be able to figure it out pretty easily. I know people will tell me down there because they did on the last video, in my experience, people have just as much trouble with a liner lock as they do a frame lock. That's fine. Your mileage is going to vary, right? Not all of us think exactly the same way or have the same experiences, right? Even though this is simple and it makes sense for probably the vast majority of people I'm going to hand it off to. The first thing is, yeah, it's expensive. You don't want them to accidentally drop it or damage it, right? You don't want them to do that thing where you hand it off to them and then you don't expect them to try to cut something stupid. But guys, has this ever happened to you? You're like, hey, you want to check out my new pocket knife? And yeah, sure. And they don't say anything. And then all of a sudden they're trying to cut a paperclip with it. Why? Don't do that. And they give you no warning. People do that because they don't, and it's not their fault. They're not familiar with it. They don't know. They've probably been brought up to think a knife is no different than any other tool, right? It's like you're not supposed to use a flathead screwdriver as a pry bar, but do we do it sometimes? Yeah. A lot of people feel the same way about pocket knives. Whatever, it's a pocket knife, right? They don't consider all of these different elements that we don't want. That we want our knives to be used as knives. We don't want them used, and there's certain things you don't cut with a knife, right? They don't think that way, so they're gonna do stuff like that. You don't want that happening. Number two, nobody wants to have that conversation with somebody right then and there in the moment about why is this so much money, right? There's no path you can go down without, it's one of those things where it requires a lot more conversation than what you most likely would have time for in that one setting where you're just trying to share the object of that person, right? Look at this, isn't this neat, right? You're not really wanting to talk about, people see it and they say, well, how much is something like this? Most of the time, if you say anything over 50 bucks to 100 bucks, people are going to freak out. So I just don't, unless it's somebody who I know is really, really familiar with knives, I just don't talk about the price. I don't even want to hand stuff like this off to them. A lot of times I'm carrying it just for me, right? And as much as I do want to share it with people, and I do in some situations, I'm reserved with people who I feel like are very, very new to it. Don't want it damaged. I don't want to have to sit here and have a really long conversation about why things are priced a certain way, right? No matter what, no matter how educational you bring this conversation, like the air of educationalness that you apply to this conversation, you're going to come off looking super arrogant and like a jerk at the end of it anyway, right? In this situation that I'm describing, it's we're sitting at a, like, for example, if I got a buddy, if I'm at my son's t-ball game and one of my friends, one of the other kids' parents, we're sitting together and we're talking, that's probably not a setting that I'm going to, even if he's got to cut something real quick, right? I can't get this bag open. I got Gatorade all over my fingers, right? I'm trying to get this bag of combos open, right? You got a knife? Probably not going to hand him something like that for the reasons that I just described. I'm not going to go through all of that at a t-ball game, right? Not every circumstance is sitting with a person that you've got hours on end to explain a bunch of stuff, right? So that's kind of why. Knives that I think are just fine for handing off to pretty much anybody. Your simple lockbacks, your slip joints, or like your Victorinox knives, your liner locks, right? Another cold steel lockback. And I also think multi-tools in general, or I think I've got one here somewhere. Yeah, obviously your inexpensive sort of utility knives. Now, A lot of people are going to say, that's why I only carry stuff like that. That's why I exclusively carry stuff like that. What you carry and the reason that you carry it is entirely up to you. There's a million arguments to carry a more expensive knife, right? Everybody's got a different idea of expensive and inexpensive and appropriate and inappropriate, right? Utilitarian, not utilitarian, right? And a lot of times, a lot of us carry stuff that doesn't make sense just because we enjoy it. What's important is that you are enjoying it and using it safely. But when somebody asks me for a knife, even if they know I've got something cool on me, I hand them something like this. Here you go. The Leatherman Wave Plus. No problem. Not worried that they're going to break it. It's pretty straightforward. Most people kind of know how stuff like this operates, right? Or they can figure it out easily. And the chance for something going wrong is pretty low, right? So the Leatherman, all right, that's a pretty heavy backup object, right? But if you've got that type of thing on you or, you know, close to you, right? I always tell people there's a Leatherman in my truck, you know, go ahead. Generally speaking, something smaller that can fit in a back pocket, right? That's very simple, like the Cold Steel Tough Light that's using the Triad-Lock lockback. Most people are going to know that's how you disengage it. Usually two-hand operation, nice and small, right? The chance for something going wrong is pretty low. So yeah, that's definitely something. A Victorinox knife, most people know. There's very few people are going to go, I have no idea how this operates, right? And most people have seen a Victorinox. This is the perfect backup knife. I carry it all the time in my back right-hand side pocket so that people who need a knife right then and there, I hand them that. Some of my closer friends go, you're handing me this, I know you got something cooler on you. And I go, yeah, but I'm not going to hand that to you. Sometimes you just got to be direct with people. No, I'm not going to give you that one. I'll give you this one, right? A simple liner lock, the QSP Penguin, very inexpensive. That's another element here that I think is important when you hand something off to somebody. Give them a cheapie, right? QSP Penguin is great, very straightforward. You've got the liner lock there. Most people can probably figure that out, right? Low risk for injury. And if they do break it because they're doing something dumb, right? Oh, well, in that case, you're out $30, right? Cold Steel Code 4, same kind of thing here. I mean, this is a more expensive knife, but they're probably gonna know, right? Now, on top of that, I think another good thing when you're handing off a knife to somebody in a moment of convenience, right? If it is something that's more expensive, something like Cold Steel Triad-Lock is great because if they do, you know, as soon as you turn your back, if they do decide to do something stupid with it, it's not likely that anything's going to happen to it, right? A lot of people are going to go, that's why you only carry the Cold Steel Triad-Lock and everything else is inferior, right? For prying bricks up or prying the engine out of your truck. Why do we need to do that, right? The example there is for people who don't know better, people who do treat these types of things as the tools that they are not. Right? In that situation, it's a safety net. It's damage mitigation, right? Probably not going to they might mess the blade up, but the lock will still be okay. And obviously, you know, the newbie favorite, again, not trying to be pompous, but a simple utility box cutter. Sure. Not much they can do to this thing. And if they do, you know, well, then you're out $5. Backup stuff is really important. Most highly recommended backup knives, honestly, I think these three right here are just excellent. QSP Penguin, the Cold Steel Tough Light, or a simple Victorinox knife. I think that knives like this, they're all inexpensive. They're all simple lock, simple operation, right? You know, if something goes wrong, I think it's pretty low risk for injury. It's easy to carry something like that on your person, especially the Victorinox, right? It just makes more sense. This was still almost a 30-minute video. I tried to compact this information as best I could, but I feel like the delivery here is a little bit better, and I'm hoping that more people see this video than my older one, so that people kind of get the idea that I'm trying to come across here. I'll link the stuff that I'm recommending right down below. But yeah, if you have circumstances that you've been in that are similar to the ones that I'm describing, please leave a comment down below and let me know. Those are great for other people reading, newer people coming in, right, who are getting into the knife world and probably want to share this, have this urge to share their newfound hobby with other people, right? This can save you a lot of trouble. It can save you potentially the cost of your knife in some situations. So yeah, share your experiences down below. I'd absolutely love to hear them. Guys, that's going to be pretty much it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.